Perfect. So we are now live. This is going to be a really exciting topic today. So thank you for everyone for joining us on this one. And what we're going to be digging into, around PLG is just the whole concept of where does like the enterprise fit into PLG. And so we're going to kind of like dig into that a bit more since Sandhya has a ton of awesome experience around that. So I'm super excited to go through it. But would you mind just kind of going through your background? Like, how did you wind up at Unusual.vc? Like, first off, by the way, your team at Unusual.vc has done a fantastic job with the website. It just like strikes me as unusual, and I'm like, how fitting. They're sly, they're smart, because it's just like right on brand is part of that. So. Would love to just hear your story. I know we've had you on the Product-Led podcast before, just talking about your experience at Amplitude. So I'm really excited to take this a step further and really kind of dig into your experience around all things PLG.
Yeah. Thank you for having me back. I love being a returning customer especially since it's the Product-Led Growth podcast, all about retention, right?
Totally.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here, Wes. Hello to everybody listening. I'm Sandhya. Really excited to be recording this live, and hopefully a lot of you here are listening and thinking about like product-led growth problems, and we are here and happy to help. But yes, the Unusual Ventures website is like a true labor of love. We treat it as a product, not as a website. And so it has a lot of these components that we are building over time. And every time we are thinking about the website, we think about it as like, okay, what's like the MVP functionality for this new idea we are working on? So for example, you'll see we have this really comprehensive field guide for startup founders that goes through kind of every stage. That's kind of the big reason why I came back to venture and joined Unusual, is because the team is just so exceptional. And the founders, Jyoti Bansal and John Riones, started Unusual Ventures with like a very specific vision. And not only do we invest in unusual people, but the fund itself has a fairly unique strategy where we work super closely with technical founders who want access to go-to-market expertise early in their company's development. And we have a bench of amazing operators who, will work like near full time with those founders for anywhere from like 3 to 12-month sprints to help them figure out things like, how to get their messaging up and running, how to get their website launched, what is it that is like the right sales process for the company that they are building, or how to define their product-led growth strategy. Hiring, honestly, Wes, between you and me right now, it's way easier to raise venture capital than to hire great engineers. So one of the things that Unusual does is actually like go help make those technical hires. We have an amazing recruiter on board who works directly with these companies. So it's a founder engagement model of just staggering depth. And what it allows people like me to do is, be a venture capitalist, but still actually get to build alongside the founders that we work with. So it's like very much, have your cake and eat it too, and win-win for both the founders and for me. Which takes me kind of back to like where I started my journey. I'm an engineer. I studied electronics and computer science at IIT Bombay back in India. I was working on startups before it was cool to have like a startup out of your dorm room. When I was doing it, people just thought we were really stupid, and they were fair to some extent because we didn't really know what we were doing. But that's just kind of how I started. I've always been a builder. I have loved the act of creating something from nothing, but got really curious about venture capital after my founding experience, and ended up joining Sequoia Capital's office in India when they were getting started. Moved with them to the US, and went back to building with Amplitude for an incredible 4+ years before joining Unusual.
And I guess on that note too, do you want to like do some of the bragging rights from what you've been able to accomplish at Amplitude? Like I was on your LinkedIn and you've been able to accomplish some amazing feats. So this is your humble brag moment. Just let us know, what were you able to accomplish in Amplitude when you were there?
Yeah, no, it's I don't really understand how to do humble brags. So I'm going to probably spoil this a lot. But the reason I joined Amplitude was I just loved the problem they were going after, and the team, the founding team, the early team that I joined was just, they were amazing examples of like talent and humility combined into a force of nature. And I loved the problem. Like they were trying to help people figure out like, okay, what about your product is actually working, and how do you use the data from that early product adoption to build your company strategy, right? So like talking about product led growth, like that's kind of what was amazing about Amplitude, was they were helping people really leverage the behavior people were showing within the product to figure out the rest of the company's strategy. And I was seeing that problem again and again with the founders that I was investing in as a venture capitalist, which is, if it's working, great. Everyone is, clapping and celebrating the traction. If when it stops working, you have no idea why. Like, oh, suddenly, people are not coming back to use our product, our retention is down, something happened, but we're not sure why it's not working. And that's why I saw a really strong fit for something like Amplitude to exist in the world. And I was lucky enough that, even though I was a VC, which basically qualifies you to have no other job at all in the world, they let me join. And I played a lot of different roles, from like being a PM to a marketer, setting up inside sales, like a lot of things that I never thought I would do, including starting Amplify, which has now become one of the biggest product conferences in the world. So, really amazing learning experiences for like an ex-engineer to be
For
able
sure.
to pull off. It was just amazing. And thankfully, we were able to grow the business 30x over that time in ARR.
Oh, and you just sneak in that part at the end, just 30x growth. It's nothing much, but
Just
that's
just
incredible.
getting started.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. I know we chatted a bit about product-led growth before, but I guess for everyone in the audience who's listening too, like how do you typically define product-led growth?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of times when I'm talking to first-time founders who want to do a product-led growth strategy, they worry about things like, oh, well, if I'm doing PLG, I'm supposed to have a credit card, or if I'm doing PLG, then I can't hire a salesperson, can I? Like it's no. So I think for me the common factor and like the underlying definition of product-led growth is, at the heart of it all, is a self-serve product experience that is what helps you acquire and retain customers. Everything else is tactics that you can modify based on like what it is your customer needs, what are the different segments you are going after, what are the strengths of your team versus weaknesses. Like everything else is negotiable, but at the heart of it is a self-serve experience that drives your acquisition and retention strategy. And like the other misconception I see with product-led growth is people think of it as a product thing. Like, oh, if you're doing product-led growth, this is what the product team needs to do. But the reality is it's actually a whole company strategy. So if you want to do product-led growth, then every other function needs to define their core objective as getting people's hands on the product and getting adoption for the product through whatever activities they are doing, which could be community, education, brand marketing. Like it doesn't matter what those other functions are, sales, success, but the goal is to get more hands on the product and leverage that amazing self-serve product experience to accomplish everything else. So I think for me, like that comes, all comes back to the self-serve experience. Do you have one or not?
Okay. And I guess on that note too, like, why do you think there is that misconception that, like this is just a product thing? It's just all it is. Like, so a lot of people I think we talk to as well, like just still think it's a free trial or a freemium model. And I mean, like that definitely is like one component a lot of product-led companies share, but there's more than that at the end of the day. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on like, why do you think there is that misconception that it's just about the product and product team specifically?
I mean, I'm not sure. Probably because of the name. So I don't know if you want to blame yourself a little bit for that, Wes. But it's,
I'll blame myself.
names obviously are, incredibly important, and often, and this is such a complex, messy topic that often it's only like your fully lived experience that allows you to appreciate everything about this type of strategy, as opposed to just kind of going by like a few, blog articles that you read on the topic. I think, that's kind of the root of many misconceptions.
Definitely. Yeah. Names are helpful. Like I think since product-led growth has like gained a ton of steam, there's like, man, like community-led, customer-led, data-led, like there's just like a whole nother pack of worms in that part. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, okay, you mentioned, yes, being product-led is more of a full team kind of philosophy. You can't just have like one team kind of work at it for it to be truly successful. So how do you typically see different teams, like even outside the product team, work differently in a product-led company versus, let's say, a more traditional sales-led company?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, what I'll try to do is maybe like think about this at different stages of a business, right? So, and my favorite example is even at the very beginning. So, you are maybe like you have just started your company, you have your prototype, and you are having kind of, early conversations with design partners. You maybe, you're preparing for a launch. Like even at that very early stage, when you're just a year into building your new company, the way you would think about the product and whether your company is ready is very different if you want to do product-led growth. If you're doing a top-down enterprise sale, maybe you haven't even hired any AEs yet. If first year, it's the founders who usually are out there selling, but you don't really have to have nailed all your messaging, right? If you're doing top-down selling, every conversation is a learning opportunity on, okay, how do I talk about my product? How do I position it? Is this something people will pay for? Like every conversation, every pitch meeting is a learning opportunity to polish your marketing message. So you don't need to have figured it out before you kind of go public and launch your company and start selling. If you're doing product-led growth, you need to have a very clear positioning and messaging strategy before you go public, because you're not getting to talk to your customers before they try your product. They're going to do it on their own, right? So if your messaging isn't clear, your positioning isn't clear, what you're really going to have is a lot of people who should not be signing up for your product coming to your website and like checking it out and trying it because your messaging was vague or not positioned correctly. And that is super dangerous because now you are not getting a clear signal. Like, okay, all these people tried it out, but, didn't get activated, didn't complete onboarding, didn't come back to the product. Does that mean that like no one wants your product? Now, what does that mean? So I think there are so many other aspects to like starting a product-led growth style business that you need to think through, which are very different when you're doing top-down selling. And this is kind of just like, in the first few months of building and launching your product. But now there are, we can go down like the same similar examples for customer success, for demand gen, for how you staff your product team, whether you invest in having hires that are focused on things like documentation, educational content. So all of those things are dramatically different if you're doing a top-down sale versus product-led growth.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. The difference of how you market, for instance, like that's the one big thing. Like you're typically not charging, but going after users versus like the execs at the top. And so the way you sell to them is completely different as well. So thank you for kind of going through that. And I'm curious, like if you could walk us through, like in your experience, I mean, at Amplitude, you're able to see like literally inside thousands and thousands of companies who are like approaching product-led growth and could see like the inner workings of their user engagement and all that stuff. And then now at Unusual.vc, you're able to see, some earlier stage companies go through and like try and apply some of these concepts. So out of all that experience, like what do you think is really like some of the big challenges that product-led companies are up against?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do meet a lot of founders who assume that like product-led growth is like the easier strategy, which is very interesting because the way I think about it is like you need to choose product-led growth not because it has fewer challenges or it's easier or sexier or newer, but because it's the right fit for your team's DNA and what your customer needs, right? Like if your customer is not one who can try the product on their own, whether that's for security reasons or because they're just not a tech savvy customer base, whatever the reason is, if your customer doesn't want to try the product on their own, or you as a founding team have literally never worked in a company that has had a product-led approach, you're going to be in a very, very tough spot. Like your biggest challenge is going to be that your strategy doesn't have product market fit, right? Like
Yeah.
your strategy is not the right strategy for you or your customer. So that I think is really important. And product-led growth has been around in kind of different forms and shapes forever. So when I think about product-led, like I go all the way back to like 1983 when the internet as we know it was born, right? Because there were two huge things that happened, which is like AOL started offering people essentially what today we would call a freemium plan, where as an ISP, you would get access to internet. They would give you free minutes. They would give you like access to some free to play tool games. So it goes all the way back to like the birth of the internet, even before like SaaS as it exists today was born. We had kind of try before you buy motions. We had open source software, like the GNU project was started in 1983. So it's not that these strategies are novel. I think it's really important that you are a student of them and you understand like what it takes and they are a good fit. So the challenges that I see, coming back to your question, the challenges I see companies tackling when they choose product-led growth without having that authenticity, without having customers who actually want to try before they buy, is that their self-serve product just doesn't get any adoption. So, they have this product out there and, it's free to try, or there's a free plan that people can use, but no one is signing up to use it. And when people do sign up, they are just not seeing people get activated, onboarded, and retained. So whenever I see that problem, I ask founders to break it down, right? So I break it down into kind of three steps. Or three stages. So first stage is let's just focus on who is signing up. Are you getting the right type of people aware about your problem and getting them to sign up? And if that in itself is not working, it means that you didn't go through a good enough private beta phase where you could get evangelists to really engage with your product, right? Because when you're doing a private beta, it's not just about how many people are trying your product out, it's who is trying the product out. Are there people who are going to talk about how good your product is in that private beta to the world? Because that's how you attract more people to come try it out on their own, right? Like you need someone championing your product out there, because you're not doing a top-down enterprise sale, which means you need a bottom-up audience. So that's kind of the very first phase, is like, are people, finding your product and signing up because you have created the right evangelist community early on? And is your messaging right so that you're getting the right kind of sign up? So often people will have a free a plan or trial where they're not really tracking like who's signing up. Like, is it, your personal Gmail that you're using to sign up? Are you signing up through your company account? What kind of company is it? Can we qualify it to make sure that this is the type of company we want using our product, or is it actually not a good fit? So, that's kind of like phase one problem is just the sign up problem. The phase two problem is activation. If you want to build a product-led growth strategy for your company, being able to get customers activated on their own is incredibly important. Everything else falls apart without that. So, comes back to that self-serve product experience. Do you have the right onboarding? Do you have documentation if it's for developers? Do you have the right educational videos, even if it's just 5? Like, do you have those kind of early pieces well defined so that someone can actually get activated on their own? And only when we have kind of solved those two do I even look at the phase 3 problem, which is retention. Okay, are people who are getting activated coming back and using your product again? Because if they are not, then you have a product quality issue. Like, there's something about the product that is not giving your customers the aha moment that they need to get excited and come back and promote your product within their organizations. And you can focus your attention on fixing that. And, this is kind of, I think, the most common challenges that I see. And it all manifests as in a very simple way in like your vanity metric, which is, okay, my, overall, like whatever weekly returning users is like really low. I have a problem. But you have to kind of think like 5 layers deeper to figure out exactly where the problem is.
Interesting. And one of the things that as you were talking, I guess I'll recap some of those areas, or at least from my understanding. So if you're pre-product market fits, yes or no, does it make sense to go ahead with product-led growth, in your opinion?
I would say it depends. So the way I would think about it is, so product market fit, by the way, is not like one moment in time.
Totally. Thank you for mentioning that.
I think there's at least like 3 big waves of product market fit you have to go through. And literally every time you are building something different or, trying to nail a new industry segment. So for example, there are companies that will start only catering to like healthcare and fintech because they are security products. And now when they're trying to like get other industries on board, they have to go through the product market fit journey all over again to make sure that what they're building works for, I don't know, this pharma company or something like that. So it's definitely not a line in the sand. The way I think about when you are ready to do a public product-led growth strategy is how successful is your private beta, right? So you can do private betas at a lot of different like scales. Like you can do a private beta, like, what Superhuman did recently, for example, where, you just used test flight to download their app and, went through a white glove onboarding. And, while they did have a self-serve product, they wouldn't let people just get started on their own. They went through kind of a white glove process. So they waited a long time to really, launch a public, get started on your own kind of motion, which is what we call product-led growth. Or you could maybe have like 10 enterprise customers in a private beta where your product is spreading like wildfire in their orgs and everyone's coming back using it on a regular weekly basis, and your retention curve is so strong that you're ready. So it's all about like how strong your metrics are in that private beta. And you could call that kind of phase 1 product market fit, which is that at least that you have built something differentiated that people are coming back to, but you might not have figured out pricing yet if you're going for like an SMB market segment. If you're going for an enterprise segment, you should actually get paid private beta customers before you do product-led growth, because you need to understand pricing way before you open things up to customers to try on their own. So, the answer is always it depends, but I think I would say the early signal you want of like a high retention cohort, whether it's with a lot of individual users or a few enterprise clients, doesn't mean you have achieved full product market fit, but it shows that you have at least built a differentiated product that solves one problem well, and then you are ready for a product-led growth motion. And you might have to go through another similar cycle when you build out like the enterprise edition of your product, or you go from individuals to serving teams. You might have to go through another cycle similar to that again.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm building out this chart here, and it was in my mind. Now I'm writing it down here. So basically, if you're like early stage or product market fit, what you recommend is go ahead with this product-led path. If you've had a successful beta, you've gone ahead, you see like good retention metrics, you've gone through and validated like, hey, we're solving a unique problem here, and this is looking really great from solving a perspective. Don't go ahead if you don't do any sort of beta whatsoever. You're just kind of winging it, letting people self-serve, because you're going to miss out on a lot of that learning. As you will miss out on talking to these people, really figuring out what are their core problems and how you can solve them. So yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. And I think like whenever I try to answer that question too, it always is like, it depends. But I think, yeah, that kind of gets a bit closer to like, if you are in that bucket, successful beta, like it should make sense based on our generalization here. But at the end of the day, I think it's super helpful. So let's say you're beyond the startup, you're maybe above like 1 million in recurring revenue. You're still a smaller business, maybe between 1 to 20. And you got there by the sales-led way. What would you say to that person who's thinking about going down and becoming more product-led? Because they already have something that works, that's got them to there. They probably validated, you know what, maybe their retention is even good as well. How would you like kind of help that person like navigate that decision of like, should you become more product-led or not?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, it comes back to like, how do you decide if product-led growth is a good fit for you? And hopefully getting to that first million in ARR with a top-down motion has answered a lot of the critical questions, right? So the critical questions are like your customer, or, there are enough stakeholders within your target accounts customer base that are happy to try a product on their own. You have figured out how to enable that. And this is where kind of product-led growth for enterprise is different, is you have to think about the multi-stakeholder motion. So, the advice I give to founders figuring out PLG for enterprise after they hit kind of that first, million in ARR with top-down sales is think about the first 4 weeks of your customers' kind of adoption experience. Right? You did a top-down sale, you sold this product into a company. What happens in like the very first few weeks of them trying? Who are the people who get involved or have to be involved to get the account started and going? And what parts of the product do they touch in like their very first 4 weeks? Because it's definitely not all, right?
Totally.
I've worked with so many very, very highly talented product teams that are building feature after feature after feature that their customers don't really use. And it helps them sell the product vision, but people don't actually use like 80% of the product and they only use the 20. So those are, I think, the most important questions to extract out of like your initial selling and experience making customers successful is, who gets involved early? Can they do product implementation on their own? And which parts of the product do they actually touch in like the very first few weeks? And once you have answers to those, that is basically your self-serve product experience. Whether you want to do a free trial or a free plan, like that, depends on some other factors. But that is the self-serve experience. You scope the product down to like what they touch in the first few weeks. And you create an onboarding flow that involves the early stakeholders who had to get involved. So for example, maybe your main end user is a data scientist, but they are not able to get activated or like set up the product that you have built for them without this one person from the DevOps team getting involved. I'm making this up. That doesn't actually work that way.
That's okay.
But that's the only way your enterprise account works. So your self-serve product experience needs to reflect that, okay, here's a data scientist, give them a checklist or like a onboarding flow that step by step helps them understand, okay, here's what you do next. You need to get this authentication from your DevOps team before you can go to the next step, right? So you have to learn what the first few weeks look like and then recreate that experience in a self-serve onboarding flow for your product. And only then are you ready to actually like shift to a product-led growth motion, right? And this is just kind of, it's your product ready, right? Now you have to figure out, okay, how are you going to think about customer support? You're used to staffing your support and success teams based on your sales quota and your top-down model. Now you have a bunch of potentially amazingly promising target accounts that have signed up to use you on your own. So how are you going to think about staffing support and success? How much support do customers need for that first 4-week experience? How much of the heavy lifting can your product do versus you still need like white glove onboarding? I think those are like the few things to really nail. And even if you're only focused on enterprise, you don't have to necessarily change pricing. We worked with a lot of companies that are doing a product-led growth motion with no credit card plan. So it's just about getting their hands on the product and helping them see the value on their own, and then engaging with sales for the rest of the motion that you guys were following before in your sales-led strategy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like that's definitely a step in the right direction. Like get that free kind of demo where people could go through and actually use the product and experience the value of it. I know we were helping the company called OutSystems, like with something similar, and they had like a freemium account that was super powerful, could do many, many things with it. But for the longest time, they didn't have like that option to actually pay by credit card, because it was kind of like averaging out around like $4,000 per month for like their average kind of customer. So it's kind of like at the upper end of what most limits are for credit cards. Depends on the business, but yeah, that's super interesting. And one of the things, I'll throw a curveball question at this, and okay, so I like your strategy, like those first 4 weeks, understands them and really figure out, okay, what does someone do? What is the depth of them using that product? What features are they really getting a ton of value at? I think that's a brilliant way if you're thinking about, in that first onward experience, in that first time someone's going to experience the product, that's probably most likely what they're going to be doing anyway. So it makes sense why you would have to like analyze that first 4 weeks for that purpose. Now, let's say someone has a super clunky, really hard to use product with a huge, like super long time to value, where like you'd be lucky if it was 4 weeks where, you could even remotely get value to this product. How would you think about it in that kind of lens where, like, is it even like an option, like for them to be product led? Should you not go down this path? Just given that it is a complex product. How would you think through that?
Yeah, so great question, and actually something we dealt with at Amplitude. Like, so this one is very, very close and personal to me, and I think a lot of like complex enterprise software kind of fits this problem statement, right? Which is, you either need like a lot of stakeholders or a lot of historical data to get value out of the product. And so, what do you do? And I think the reality is like, and we can debate, whether we call it product led or not. But to give you context on like the Amplitude situation, so you could, if you already had a CDP, right? Suppose you have implemented something like Segment, you can have an amazing implementation experience with Amplitude where you just kind of turn segments destination on, and you've already like done all your taxonomy work, and your analytics pipeline is like brilliantly designed, which probably means like you've already spent months doing all the prep
Of
work
course.
for you to have an amazing experience with Amplitude. Great. But not all of our customers were like that, right? So a lot of our customers were people, like Fortune 100 companies, didn't have CDPs, had product teams that barely had any access to data, did not know what they should measure. And we wanted to make them have their aha moment with Amplitude without talking to sales. That I think is like the problem you are pointing to, which is, okay, how do you do that? And the solution for us was actually investing engineering resources into developing a hyper-real dummy data environment. So think of it as like a sandbox you can play in, where the data is hyper-real, but it's not your company's data.
Yep.
And the aha moment that the customer experiences while using our product on the dummy data is, oh my God, like I just did a cohorted retention analysis on my own for the first time in my life. I never thought that it would be this easy, right? So they're not getting the full value, which is I just found a retention problem, in my own data. But at least they're getting the partial value and reaching an aha moment of, hey, I can now do this analysis on my own. I didn't have to write SQL. It took me literally 2 minutes. I don't even know how to like get this analysis done right now in my organization. So that's kind of the flow we created, was that you could like sign up and explore that demo data. And it was a really significant investment, because we had to create hyper-real data that like changes over time and has interesting patterns that can be discovered while like the analysis is being done. And every time we built a new feature, we had to make sure that the data had patterns that would showcase that feature properly, right? So it was a significant investment into creating a sandbox that our enterprise customers could play with and learn on their own without having to talk to anybody. So it was almost as good as a free trial, with the only exception being it was, hyper real, like dummy data.
Right. And I think one of the things you mentioned last time we had you on the podcast was just around the lines of that situation was kind of unique, where you had product folks signing up for Amplitude, and then they would get the code, and like from the implementation standpoint, they would always hit the bottleneck with like the engineering or development, and it would take them a long time to actually get into the product. That would still, once they do get it implemented, then it's about getting the data in and like understanding it. So yeah, I think like in that particular situation, it does make sense to have something quick where people can easily see what this could look like, what that better life looks like. And that's ultimately what you're trying to get at with a free trial or a free model anyways.
Exactly.
I just think for some products, especially like Amplitude, where it could take, depends on your data too. Like if it's a small B2B company, it might even take like 3 months, maybe longer, who knows, to get it implemented correctly and then see the value of, your first insight that's really meaningful to the business.
Yeah. And I think today, like, almost any company that has like security sensitive, data involved, like has the same problem. How can you do product-led growth without going through security review wells?
Totally.
Right? How are you going to do it? So I think for a lot of companies where that is a bottleneck, where, their end customer is willing to try the product on their own, but there are very real logistical hurdles to getting the full product experience themselves. I think, using very clever hacks like this, by the way, that are not cheap. Like you have to design it so that it's very compelling, right? So like using hacks like this to give your customer that aha moment, whatever way you get there, I think should be the goal of our founders.
Just for the audience, I'll share 2 other ways you could potentially think about this problem, because this one pops up a lot and is a big challenge when you have a longer time to value. So AppQ's had a similar situation as you, where like there was the product folks signing up for it, and they were just like, oh, the developer's taking forever. And they noticed actually in their data, they're like, wait a minute, there's tons of people signing up for our free trial and paying at the end of it, which is good. It looks good on the front, but then the short-term churn initially for them was a lot higher. So they like start asking people, why are you like canceling? And it just kept coming up. Like a lot of these bigger enterprises, we're just paying for it because they're like, hey, we haven't had a chance to actually see it. We're interested. We think you're the right fit, but we want to have enough time to go through it. So the way around it that they found was a usage-based trial. So it's kind of like a pseudo freemium, pseudo free trial, but you can use app queues for a certain number of users without a time limit. So I think that's one unique way you could do it. And then when I was at Vidyard, one way we tried to approach it, we had a video hosting platform, which if you had, like you were mentioning, and I with like Segment, if you came ready with like segments ready to plug and play, like the taxonomies are all done, like it's easy. Same thing with Vidyard. It's like if you come with a really great video and you're ready to put it up on like your homepage or something that gets a ton of traffic, like you're going to see the analytics of that video pretty quickly.
Right.
But most people aren't ready with that. So they don't have that ready to go. And so what we ended up doing was building a complementary product, which was a simple Chrome extension, which in about a minute or two, like you could record a video and then it just got kind of floated over to the main product where you could see those analytics. So I think there's like, for every time I hear this question of like, oh, what do you do with the long time to value? It's about creativity. It's not about like, this is a roadblock, we cannot become product led, but it does take a lot more thinking. So for all those like point solution products, I think it's a bit easier, but it also depends like, is the person you're selling to or the end user going to be able to fully implement this? And so I really appreciate you kind of sharing that example with Amplitude because it is a unique one as far as the end user might not have everything they need to see this through.
Yeah. The way I think about it is, everyone focuses on easy to use, right? Like, oh, is the product easy to use? What really matters is whether the product is easy to learn.
Yeah.
Because like easy to use is table stakes. Of course, difficult to use is frustrating. Like even when you know how to, right? Salesforce is like the evergreen example of that, where everyone who uses Salesforce has learned how to use it and still finds it like challenging and frustrating at times. But the question is, if you're building something new that people haven't used before, how can you make it easy to learn? And so it's like the difference between like waiting on the other side of like a chasm, knowing that, yeah, you can leap across, but maybe you might fall and you're not sure how far you will fall if you jump, as opposed to like, okay, I'm here and there's a very clear bridge going from like this side to the other side. And I just need to like take one step forward at a time over this little bridge. So when you're thinking about product-led growth, like for me, that bridge is what matters, right? That bridge is the difference between you have a great, easy to use product that your sales team sells versus you have a great, easy to use product that your customers can learn how to adopt on their own. And the bridge itself is almost like its whole own product strategy. Are you going to have templates, right? So like Webflow, Airtable do an amazing job of like, there's no empty state. As soon as you enter the product, here's a template, because it will probably take you like a full 4 weeks to do your own thing in those tools. Even though they are easy to use, like they're not easy to learn how to like really get all the amazing magical value out of. So they get you started with templates, right? Like here's no empty state. Here's something you can like fool around with and poke at, and you can learn on your own. Or if you're a dev tool, they start you with like, here's the documentation, here's code snippets, here's kind of like a semi-working sandbox example, fiddle with this. And by the way, like whenever you want to just like passively learn, here's a few videos to watch. So even if your end user can do everything on their own, like you need to build that bridge. And if they can't do everything on their own, then the bridge becomes like even more important. And, having that experience that like helps them create something or like copy something over that they can get started with, even if it's not like the, flow that they really wanted to run beginning to end, like gets them over the bridge. Now they know how to use the product, they know its value, and they can bring everyone else along who needs to be involved for a full implementation.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's the superhero analogy. Like with this whole onboarding experience and product, and like what you were mentioning about making it easy to learn, whether it's templates and stuff like that to just get people started. It's like with every product, there's someone before they meet your product and start using it. They're like a underpowered version of who they could potentially be. There's high potential, like where they could go with this product, but it's just about, okay, in that transformation journey, that bridge you're mentioning, how do we take, like, let's say an average human being and make them absolutely incredible at, like, whether it's product analytics or all these other amazing tools. And so you nailed it. Like that is really what it comes down to, making it easy to learn, easy for people to get there. And I think there's a ton of ways to get there, but if you can learn it and expedite that process, that's really what is going to take people the most amount of time. Now, as we kind of wrap up, I want to hear your thoughts on just PLG and enterprise. I think that's one of those misunderstood areas. I know I've had a lot of people come to me and say, like, Wes, like, I don't think like PLG could ever work. Like, you can never sell $1 million contract. And yeah, I've seen that happen too. So there is like a lot of misconceptions around that. Do you want to just kind of break down what your thoughts are on that whole topic?
Yeah. I think, and there are people who have like really sales leaders who have gone really deep into kind of the mechanics of like how to marry or how to layer on kind of sales on top of a product led and bottom up motion. And obviously companies that have, successfully been doing that. I think one of my favorite examples of that is Datadog, for example. Like they've really, really nailed that well. But the few things that stand out to me are as follows. So one big problem is, and one big mistake people make is that even though they are targeting enterprise accounts, they will design the self-serve experience for SMB teams. Right? Because they're just so used to thinking about self-serve as SMB. Like they will say, okay, the free plan can only have one individual user, no teams allowed, because they think that's like how free plans should work. They limit it. So ask them, well, how is your enterprise team going to try the product in a way that the sales team will go like close a big contract if only one individual user is involved in the trial? Like you can't, it doesn't work. So kind of goes back to like, think about the first 4 weeks of your enterprise sale and make sure that your product-led growth strategy like recreates that enterprise experience, even in a free plan or trial. I think that's incredibly important. And then the second thing is just like figuring out how to layer on success and sales. For enterprise, that's incredibly important. And I think a lot of companies have successfully executed different strategies. Like, they'll start with success first. So when they are just getting out of the private beta, instead of hiring sales leadership, they'll actually first hire success leadership because they want to be able to cherry pick like some of the big accounts signing up for free, make them super successful. Founders can kind of focus on figuring out pricing, and now they have a model of success that a sales team can kind of emulate. But I do think that layering on sales at the right time is kind of the magic of product-led growth for enterprise. And the few things you want to look for are, you have more pipeline in terms of your enterprise accounts discovering a free product on their own and signing up than your founders can handle. So now you're kind of ready to think about, okay, let's actually hire a head of sales because our target accounts are discovering us on their own. They're signing up, they're having successful activations. We are ready. Like we need to get a real sales team involved. And that's incredibly important because, whatever you call them, whether you call them account managers or, customer success, really in a PLG motion, like that's your sales team once the target account has tried the product. And now what you need to figure out is make sure that you have, very clear definitions, not for PQLs, but for PQAs. And that's another difference between PLG for SMB versus enterprise. is it doesn't matter, if there's like one product qualified lead. You need to have a clear definition for what's a product qualified account, which is, fits the ideal company profile and has the right type of person from that account involved in trying the product. And only then do you want your sales team to reach out, not before that. Before that, you just like let other people try it, keep trying, encourage them to invite the right stakeholders in, but sales shouldn't get involved. But once you have that product qualified account, you can run a sales motion that looks a lot like the post kind of POC and post POC segment of a traditional enterprise sale.
Awesome. And I'll just add one thing that for a company who is thinking about going down this, if they haven't had any success with, like, let's say they have successful individual, like upgrading the user to the paid account, but they haven't quite cracked the teams, and they've thought about like what a product qualified lead or a product qualified account could look like. One of the easiest ways, if you do have a sales team to do this, just find your best sales rep, start handing them the product qualified leads and figure out a way to really try and upgrade these accounts, because you'll probably learn. One of the things that I want to point out that you mentioned too is like that it's usually the accounts that matter more than just like, oh, qualified lead. Regardless of what term you use internally, like whether you identify it as a product qualified lead or a product qualified account, I don't think it matters as much as just understanding like what is a good account and how can we really help those people use the rest of the product and get more value out of it. So I'm happy you mentioned that as well, since it's an important thing to figure out for any business along this growth journey. And anything else we missed throughout this whole topic?
No, this is, really great conversation, and thank you so much for having me over. I think, to recap, like one of the strong kind of pieces of advice I have for founders who are thinking about product-led growth is making sure that they treat it as kind of a fundamental choice for their whole startup journey, not just something to like layer on here or there, or as like a thing to do because investors are looking for it. Like those are all terrible reasons to do it. Like it's a very fundamental choice because your founding team needs to be authentic to a product-led growth strategy. You need to pick investors to collaborate with who understand product-led growth as opposed to top-down enterprise sale. Your first few leadership hires might depend on like the fact that like, okay, you're doing product-led growth instead of something else, because the way that PLG teams grow and scale, like the goals you set for adoption versus revenue, the dollars you invest in self-serve product experience versus in marketing and demand gen. So a lot of those big decisions all come from the fact that you have pursued a product-led growth strategy. So your team makeup and alignment on like how you're setting those early goals with your board matter a lot. So it has to be treated as kind of a fundamental choice early on, which is, okay, for my startup idea, not just is this like a good, problem to solve, but the right go-to-market motion will likely be product-led. And hence our founding team is the right founding team to go after this problem in this way. And if it's not, if we have gaps, then those are the first few leaders we will hire into the company. So I think it's really important to think about it early as opposed to, just layering it on later. I've like literally never seen that work.
Yeah. And we've worked with a lot of companies too, at like the 700, even like 1,000 plus range, like going back from sales led to product led. And believe me, it's a lot harder when you're trying to churn like a bigger company and go back to this. So I couldn't agree more with like aligning your leadership with this new direction too. And you mentioned it too, like hiring that success leader before the sales leader. I think I've seen that time and time again. And initially it surprised me, but then after a while, I'm like, no, I get it. Like, it's just like, how can we service these users better? And I think the one kind of sentence I'll wrap up for like product-led growth is, if you really want to make this whole go-to-market strategy work for you, you need to understand that end user success will eventually become your success. So the more you actually lean into helping your end users become successful, the more likely you are to actually have this model work for your business at the end of the day. So I'm super happy you brought that up as well, because yeah, it's definitely something I definitely resonate with. And thank you for taking all this time. I know your time is super valuable to go through this and share your thoughts on PLG and how that fits into the enterprise. I have a ton of takeaways. I got literally, I don't know if you can see, 2 pages of notes here. And it's been a blast. And where can people find out more about you?
I think, Unusual.vc and Sandhya.vc are both great places. If you're thinking of starting a company in B2B software, please reach out to me, and love to chat and see how I can be of help.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a blast.
Awesome. Thanks, Wes.
Bye.